Well, kia ora and welcome everybody to yet another episode of Big Life Mindset. Today's guest, I am so stoked to be able to bring to your attention because we've actually just had this conversation off camera. And that when I read Jeremy Norrie, that's our guest, when I read his bio, there were so many aspects of it that I thought, oh my God, I've got to catch up with this person. And then I'd read another line. I was like, oh my God, I've got to catch up with and chat with this guy. And then I read another line. And it was just more of that, just the whole way through. And so it is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce Jeremy Norrie. How you going, Jeremy?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the opportunity.
It is my pleasure, bro. It is absolutely my pleasure. Where are you calling us from? Where are we dialing into?
I live in California. So normally I live in the mountains up in Big Bear, and it's snowing there right now. So I can't go home. And I'm at my parents' house, and that is near Los Angeles. We're in the valley. So it's commonly called the San Fernando Valley, or, in all kinds of different movies and TV shows, it's just the valley.
The valley. I love it. You
Yeah.
hear it so much though, right? So it's like
Oh, yeah.
the valley. That's the place. So this is the place.
Valley Girl and all that kind of stuff. It's about us. Yeah.
Nice. Now, one of the things that caught my attention is you're a filmmaker.
This is true. Yeah.
Cool. Talk to us a little bit about that.
No problem. Yeah. I'm an independent documentary filmmaker, and we get our films distributed on all kinds of streaming platforms. Amazon has one, Fox, CBS, Apple TV, Roku channels, even YouTube channels. And my stuff is Tubi has pretty much everything, but the rest, they just have different portions of my catalog. And we do all kinds of different subject matter. So my absolute most popular films are in what I like to call the strange phenomenon category. So that is Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, that kind of stuff. And the films we've made in those worlds, they have millions of views, big successes. And I'm super lucky to have made those films. But I also do all kinds of other topics that are a little bit more near and dear to my heart. Not that I'm not fascinated by that other stuff. It's totally fascinating. But I've done mindfulness, I've done martial arts, and I've done all kind of bullying, animal rehabilitation about the zoo that's up where I live at, and just a lot of things that I consider really important social or just important things that if we were able to bring more attention to, it would really improve the world and improve a lot of those situations for the people working on those things. So,
Man,
yeah.
I love that. I love that. And just the work that you've done. I mean, I didn't actually realize about the bullying aspect. What was something that you did in there? Because that's obviously something that you see, not just, I mean, I'm a parent, and
For
it's not
sure.
something you see just in the school playgrounds. It's something that you see in the office. It's something that you see out in the pubs. It's everywhere, right? So what was something that you did there?
So we actually stumbled upon this topic when I was doing my martial arts documentary. So as you may have seen, I have kind of a history in mixed martial arts prior to being a filmmaker and prior to my cannabis industry experience. And so it's always been near and dear to my heart. I still follow the sport deeply. And it's been important in my life, correcting things for me that have helped me with my health and made me have a better life. So I wanted to dig deeper into that subject matter. And as I started to do that, one of the things that I kept running into was pretty much everyone I talked to had some sort of a bullying story that led them to whatever it was that they're training in, be it like jujitsu or boxing or Muay Thai or whatever it was. And they were varying in degrees of severity. Some were extremely severe and some were just minor. But that kind of gives you the scope of just how much probably everyone is dealing with some sort of, and maybe it's not traditional bullying, but the way you interpret these situations has a lot of impact upon how it is for you mentally and physically, and et cetera. So when we did our bullying documentary, it was born out of that martial arts background where I kind of got exposed to how many people are encountering it and how effective like martial arts was for dealing with it. Not in that they could just beat up the bullies or something like that. I suppose that that's what a lot of people think, but that it just gave people confidence, and it helped them to kind of forgive themselves and deal with those traumas in a way that other things weren't really being effective. So when we did the bullying thing, you realize, oh, there's all these different things that like could be bullying. And then there's sibling rivalry that is kind of a normal, natural thing. And there's various kinds of things like that amongst your friends. And so some of this isn't necessarily bad. It's normal, natural stuff that people just have to learn to deal with. But some of it is abnormally cruel. And when you're kind of encountering that, and some of it is not physical at all. Like when you see how girls bully each other, it's traditionally not physical, even though sometimes it is. Traditionally, they're just really cruel socially to each other. And now in the world that we live in with social media, it's worse than ever. So it's just really important that people kind of learn how to be self-sufficient in doing that. And our bullying documentary kind of touches on a lot of different subjects in that world and hopefully gives people a good starting point for attacking that.
Nice. I like that. And we pick up, so my wife and I, Debbie, we've talked about the differences between, boys and girls and bullying. And totally agree. Like boys are a lot more physical, a lot clumsier, a lot less tactical. But still very capable of bullying, obviously. And we found with girls and our experience in growing up, and our daughter, that she's at the age where she's kind of in and around a lot of that as well, is it's a lot nastier. It seems to be a lot more. They can really, really know how to strike a nerve. And like you say, it doesn't have the same level of physicality in it that it does with boys. But man, no shortage of ways to really chop a person down.
Yeah. One of the people in our documentary is a female, and she's a boxer. And she brought up a thing I thought was clever. She said, when you're growing up, you always hear sticks and stones can break my bones, but names can never hurt me. And that she thought it's exactly the opposite for her. When she goes and does boxing and gets punched in the face, she puts ice on it. She gets bruises, they heal up, no problems. But these teasing moments from her childhood live on with her in her mind all throughout her life, even to now. And it's almost the opposite of what the old nursery rhyme type saying is, that in reality, what really hurts you is the teasing. And, the physical stuff is a lot easier to get over for some people.
Yeah, bang on. Man, this is actually off topic from what I was hoping to catch up with you about, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to chat with you, Jeremy, is because you're like your diverse range of experiences that you've had. It's just incredible. Like there's the filmmaking, and obviously as you were talking through the filmmaking, you touched on something else that I was really keen on catching up with you about, and that is about your experience with cannabis and marijuana. So you've pretty much covered the full spectrum of I guess what a person can do with marijuana, in the sense that you've gone from like buying to growing to being in competitions to being in the lab. Like you've covered all the bases, right?
Yep. And I lived during the whole time. So like hearing about other places that are going through this legalization journey, where they're like, maybe they're first trying to get medical established or decriminalization or whatever stage they are at, everywhere seems to mirror the same pattern. So I've already lived through that as well. So now where I live, it's recreationally legal. Theoretically, we're all, as far as it can go. The next step is that bigger companies can get into it than already are into it. But yeah, it's been a wild journey, and kind of seeing all the ups and downs. There've been really great things that have happened. There've been really tough things that happened, and right now where we're at, even with recreational, it's been really hard. And moving forward, I think it's looking like it's going to start to get better finally. But a lot of people have really struggled, lost their businesses. It's been hard. So
it's a significant mind shift that's needed, isn't it?
It wasn't just, once we got medical and then recreational. Like, say one more time.
So it's a significant mind shift that's required to keep people progressing down that path to progress.
It is. It's a step-by-step process. And, even us in California, we lost numerous times before we were finally able to get to where we're at. And it would be close margins. Our Proposition 19 was like 49% to 51%. And it was just a little bit ahead of the time. Eventually, when another proposition came along, Proposition 64, that went to vote, and that won. We were in the majority by that time. So it will come. We have a bunch of states, and not all the states even have medical and recreational. But we chip away, and every year it gets a little bit more in our favor. So
nice. Eventually, I'm going to ask you about what people should be looking for when they're buying weed. But I thought what would help though is actually understanding like your own personal journey. So where did it all start for you, and how did you eventually become, from buying it to a guy that helps assess the quality of it?
Absolutely. So I have two projects that kind of go into a little bit more detail on this. So my documentary called The Secret Cup, that tells a lot of my history with cannabis and kind of how I got to where I'm at now, because it's a really long story. And I also have a book called Jack Moves. And that book also delves into a lot of that, and it's more behind the scenes. It shows you a lot of the bad side of things that I had to deal with before I was able to kind of get to where I'm at today. But my very first time smoking weed, we had kind of heard about it from Cypress Hill, a rap group that was talking about it. And then it was in the media a lot. There was a movie coming out called Friday, and Ice Cube was in this movie. And we had got some weed to smoke before this movie, and this was our first time smoking, me and my friends. And we had literally bought a pot leaf. So it wasn't like buds. It wasn't the actual good part of cannabis, the flower. We had bought a leaf, the thing that absorbs sun, that produces almost no THC. So we chopped it. We thought it was the right thing, though, because whenever you see cannabis, they're showing you this leaf. That's cannabis, right?
That's
so
right.
We thought, okay, we're in the right thing. Chopped it all up and smoked it, and it was it was a mess. None of us really got high, like maybe a little bit, and we went and watched that movie, and it was a good time.
Cool
eventually, later on, I did get real cannabis, and I smoked by myself, and I got high. But that was my first experience, and it's kind of a funny one.
That movie as well has left it's got a cult following. I mean, my friends and I, we were at the absolute target audience when that movie came out. Like we still think we're funny reciting lines off it. Put it that way.
Yeah, it was one of the popular mainstream movies at the time, and for it to have this cannabis spin on it, that was kind of different. That wasn't really a big part of a lot of movies at that time. So it was cool for us and for everybody that liked that.
Likewise. Did you ever watch Baked or is it Baked? Half Baked?
Half Baked, yeah. That came out later on, and that's a great movie too. And then a lot of those comedians at that time, they weren't the big stars that they are now, so you're watching it and you're kind of like getting introduced to these people and their like comedy and their personalities. It was really cool movie. And
Nice.
also it incorporated medical marijuana, which was kind of a new thing at that time too.
Yeah, so there seems to be a sticking point for a lot of people, particularly if they haven't seen the benefits of medical marijuana. Is that for a lot of people, they can't see any distinction between them. Um, and so, if I use my mum as an example, so the numbers that you talked about with that proposition that got voted down 51 to 49, almost a mirror image of that happened in New Zealand. It was put out to the general population to vote on this, whether it should be decriminalised. I can't remember the exact wording, but the wording got put out, the question got put out, and then everybody got to vote, and it was voted down 51 to 49. Extremely slim margin, but I think part of the disappointing aspect of that was how much mis and disinformation was put out into the public domain. And social media being the way it was kind of picked up and people were running with it as this is the truth, this is fact. And people like my mum who only recently realized that I smoke weed, which I have for, I don't know, 30 years. And her understanding of what happens when people smoke marijuana is that and this is no joke, her understanding was that people go out and then that's when they're always fighting in town and fighting with other people, which was just remarkable because anybody who's ever smoked weed in their life will tell you that the last thing that they want to do is have a fight. Like, you're just so chill. You'd much rather just sit on the couch and watch Friday. So just it was. I think that one of the disappointing aspects of it was how much of this kind of hyperbole around, these criminals are going to run amok and they're going to take over and they're going to be selling it into the schools and all this. It just went totally left field. And I thought if it was a more evidence-based, constructive conversation, I think those numbers would have looked quite different. Mm.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that it's really tough because that kind of scare tactics, they're very effective. They've routinely been effective over the years. I don't know that we have anything to correct that at the moment. I suppose the only thing you can do is put out more accurate knowledge to combat the inaccurate facts that people are trying to promote. But it's an uphill battle. We had the same thing. And then even amongst us in the community, there's not always one story. People frequently self-sabotage this movement because of personal interests, for business reasons or for just ego reasons, where they believe a certain story or they've had a certain experience, and so they're just going to promote this, and it becomes really convoluted. And when you think about it from a person looking on from the outside that's looking for answers, and they look at this mess, it's not going to give them confidence that they're going to find the answers that they want. And so we have a lot of good programs here that are trying to battle these things, and a lot of them are just very pinpoint focused. Certain ones are focused on getting people out of jail that are in jail for the wrong reasons. Certain ones are focused for trying to advance laws towards growing and forcing the people that are growing it to have better practices. And there's all kinds of little different aspects to it, and hopefully all of it together will eventually get us to where this is common knowledge for everyone. But at the moment, it's difficult, and you try and help the people that you can as much as possible, and when those other messages go out there, you do what you can to correct that and point people in the right direction. But without the money to really put it out there, it's hard to battle those conversations. The one thing though is that it makes me feel better though is that we do know that what we're talking about is factually correct. Even though there's misinformation out there, that's gonna fall flat eventually. When put to the test, people learn. It may be a difficult process, but eventually they learn, oh, these stories are the ones that were not true. And these are the stories that are more likely to be true. And one by one, you get another voter on your side. And eventually you get to those larger numbers to where you can really do stuff and get the movement going. And then things become more easy to do. Some places you can't, even here, you can't advertise cannabis on television. There's many hurdles that we still have to overcome to being able to get the message out.
Yeah, understandable considering where you're at in the process, and like you say, like slowly moving people forward to get one more person at a time that can sift through a lot of the fact, and be able to make an informed decision and to have an informed opinion as well. When you're looking at so you're obviously your experience is really quite in depth with cannabis, and you've gone from like that point where you were growing and you were buying and you're watching Friday, and then you started to become you became a bit more savvy and aware of what it was that you were looking for, and then eventually you're judging or you're contributing to awards criteria. What did that look like, and how did that come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So when everybody kind of starts out in cannabis, you're probably buying cannabis at first before you're growing. Some people grow first, but usually you're buying first. And there's kind of a learning curve based on the amount of money that it costs to buy certain kinds of cannabis. So you'll say, oh, this cannabis is cheaper and it looks this way. And then this cannabis is more expensive and it looks this way. And then when you smoke it, you have different experiences. Hard to say like this is stronger or this is not. It's really just different experiences. And a lot of times the more expensive cannabis is the more enjoyable experience, right? More clean, the great high, all this thing, right? Authentic medical purpose. Having less and less side effects is going to become more and more important. So people that grow with, whatever chemicals and all that's going to be represented in the plant. So as you become more and more sensitive to those kind of things, it becomes more important to have a clean product. For me, I started buying cannabis. I started growing cannabis kind of later on. And then as you're doing that, it's a step-by-step process of seeing kind of what you do and then what other people are doing, and then making little changes and talking to people about what could improve your the yield, the amount of cannabis that you're growing, and then also the quality of the cannabis that you're growing. It's kind of a balancing act between the two things. And then there's also varieties of cannabis. So when I was young, I got exposed to Amsterdam. And in the United States, we just had cannabis very simply, like I said, cheap or expensive. But when you went to Amsterdam, they had a culture of cannabis that was based around breeding. And so this started to be similar to like maybe dog breeding or maybe like wine or things like that. And there were companies that did different aspects in the industry. Certain companies were breeding companies that made seeds. Other companies were coffee shops that just sold the cannabis that was grown by these other people. And you started to develop knowledge of these things. And, oh, this plant comes from this other place. Oh, this plant comes from this plant, and this plant had a baby and that made this plant. And it becomes this whole story with subtle nuances. And it it's fascinating, just like breeding anything would be fascinating. So you see subtle things that you can bring out in these plants as you kind of blend them together, and the plants can be wildly different. So one thing I'll say, some people will maybe understand this. There's a famous breeder called Shanti Baba, and he said polygenetic traits in a cannabis plant are only present in 1 out of 100 to 1 out of 1,000 seedlings. So you're dealing with these wide varieties of plants. And if we're being scientific, so you have a genotype, which is the kind of plant. So like Maui Wowie or like Northern Lights, that would be a genotype, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we do not have cannabis named by the phenotype unless you're the grower. So you would have Maui Wowie, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who knows? You could have 16 different phenotypes. There are different variations of Maui Wowie. And as a breeder, you're going to pick those based on different traits that you like. And then you're going to maybe try and recreate those things. And so it gives cannabis this identity that it didn't have before. And now in the States, that whole thing has come with medical marijuana and being able to kind of identify all of it. And people all brought what we had from Amsterdam and tried to take that further along. And a lot of the genetics are actually from here that went there, and now they're coming back. And it's this whole world of breeding and cannabis science that's super fascinating and interesting, and if done properly, leads to really good things for people. And that's how we're moving towards all the analytical science, where we're breaking down cannabis into different compounds. So CBD recently was discovered, which is cannabidiol. And up until that point, cannabis was just thought of as THC, the part that gets you high. There's all kinds of parts to cannabis. And as we're learning more and more about it, we're learning like some of the things that you want to happen, they only happen when all of the chemicals are together in the natural ratios that are put together by the plant. And when we're pulling them out and trying to put them together, we're not getting the results that we thought we were going to get. And it's this learning process of eventually dialing it all in to where, Joe gets cancer, and it's what kind of cancer do you have? Here's exactly what you do. And that's a good thing to start with before we do all this serious chemotherapy and et cetera. So, yeah, I think cannabis as a medicine is the place where everyone should start their journey of healing. And it's the most forgiving. The least bad things can happen to you from trying cannabis. And if it doesn't work, you can always do these other things. And maybe it will help you while you're doing these other things too. Cannabis sometimes is just it's like a crutch, something that can kind of help you get to the healing, and something else is going to really get you to the place where you need to go. So yeah, all of that works together in cannabis medicine, and as we get more legalization, we'll be able to do more and more with that.
Yeah, that the medicinal cannabis aspect. So I had two quite recent experiences where two members of my family were palliative, and they in the end of life journey that they both had, they used medicinal marijuana, and I cannot overstate how remarkable the effect was on them. And one of them, the most recent, my cousin was literally lying on his deathbed. That turn of phrase, like that's an actual thing, and he's literally lying on his deathbed, and then he can, we're sitting outside, having a sesh, having a joint, and then he gets out of his bed, and he's barely been able to speak for the last couple of days, and he kind of stumbles over to us, and he has a couple of tokes on a joint. And I kid you not, the turnaround, he was talking, he was moving his arms around, really articulate. He hadn't gone back to exactly the way he was, but he was so close to 100%. You looked at the guy and you thought, how the heck did that just happen? And the only variable that changed, the only difference was he'd had a session, he'd smoked marijuana. That was the
Yeah.
only thing. Now, if I hadn't have seen that before my very eyes, if somebody had told me that, I would have thought, oh yeah, you're exaggerating, whatever. But I kid you not, that was the pure and simple effect that it had had on him.
Yeah, there are certain diseases that cannabis is almost like a miracle drug for, and it's smoking cannabis. So most of the things that you're going to use cannabis for medicinally, you're eating it.
Mm-hmm.
But every now and then there's something cannabis can be useful for smoking wise. And so there's a documentary. I can't remember the name of it. I wish I could remember. I think it's from Israel, but it's some sort of foreign country because they were not speaking English. And the shot that I'm thinking of, there's a moment in the movie where they have a gentleman, he's an older guy, and he has Parkinson's disease. He's shaky. Can't write his name. He's, and like it was bad. And this shot is one shot. They do not cut at all. So you see him kind of trying to write and like trying to do his like talking and everything. And he's like, watch this. I'm going to sit down. And like, they're like, he has a little plastic bong. He sits down. He loads one bowl in his little plastic bong and he smokes this bong. And I think they had like a timer maybe on the screen to show kind of how long this was taking. And he hits the bong and he can barely, do this. Like getting this even done is like difficult. He does it, hits like one big rip, blows it up. And he sits there and he's like, okay, give me the paper. Writes his name, writes like a full sentence. Like he's like able to talk.
Holy.
It's like miracle status to where you're like, oh my God. Anyone that has ever thought cannabis is not medicinally beneficial in any sort of way, you can watch that 5 minutes and see for yourself that it is like transformational to certain people. It is so effectively medicinal, like cannabis. So like that person, he has a different life without cannabis, an entirely different life. And there is nothing that can do that for him other than that.
Yeah, it's, man, I see these examples and as I've become more tuned in, I guess I've appreciated cannabis more, the value that it can bring. Whereas before I was just about, let's just get stoned, get high, just hang out, that kind of thing. But I think as I've grown older and I've seen the difference, and I've also taken a bit more of an aversion to just the volume of drugs that are being prescribed to us to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, man, some of these side effects, like every time I look at the side effect of something, one of them is death. And the other is just like, it's just all these really rank side effects. And I think, is this meant to help me? Like something like chemo, which I know has a place. Like I know there's a place for it. But that's quite it's an aggressive form of treatment. And just
Absolutely.
to see if there's an alternative. Like both the people that I mentioned, they were both going through cancer, and the experience that they had with having used marijuana was just like you say. They had a before that they were just two totally different people in the sense that once they smoked it, before and after they'd smoked it. Sorry. So yeah, just to see it at that level has given me much more of an appreciation of marijuana. But it's not just that kind of high-end need as well, right? Like you see a lot of athletes that are taking CBD, they're using THC for recovery. Where do you see this? Like, where is this going? Because, we talk about MMA and UFC. Like there seems to be a large number of athletes now that are using it. Why are they using it?
CBD is really effective for pain management.
CBD?
CBD, yeah. So one of the things I like to tell people is even when we're dealing with these things, we're not dealing with something that is 100% effective for everyone that uses it. So there's going to be a certain percentage of people that even if you're doing everything right, it doesn't work. And that sucks. That's also all modern medicine too.
Mm-hmm.
So not everything is 100% effective when we're talking about these things. But so CBD seems to be very, very effective for a number of things. It seems to be helpful with like anxiety and kind of calming effects. Pain management seems to be pretty effective with. And we are in the process of learning this compound. I think 20 years ago, we didn't know that CBD existed at all. So we're really learning, and the places that are doing this science, they've been small and not funded heavily. So this process is kind of growing, and we're learning all kinds of new things, like that CBD can be changed into Delta 8, which is a chemical that can get you high. So now in the States, there's this huge boom of Delta 8 products that are available for sale in all kinds of places where traditional cannabis still carries a huge jail sentence. So like Texas, for example, you can buy CBD products and Delta 8 products at gas stations and 7-Elevens and all kinds of places. But if you have cannabis there, the penalties are severe. And it's just because the compound in cannabis that is illegal is Delta 9 THC. And so those other compounds, CBD and Delta 8, they don't have any Delta 9 in it. Therefore, they are legal. And so there's this weird world of like things that are kind of legal, things that aren't legal. And what I see in the future is they're just going to legalize all of it pretty soon in the States. And that's going to open up the doors to a lot of things. Business-wise is the main reason they want to do all of this. Every single place that has done anything recreationally for cannabis, it has been because of the business. Even medical, like Colorado was one of the very first places to kind of pass a lot of these laws. And everyone saw how much money they made. California too. And that's what they think is interesting about cannabis. But there are advocates and activists in all these places that care about all these other important things. And so they're pushing all those things as well. We'll take the money, bring it all in, do the dispensaries, do whatever. But we want to be able to also have this cannabis medicine too, and be able to have it provided to the people who need it in an effective way. Like in California, when we first had recreational, they made giving away cannabis illegal. So for so many of these medical patients, they were not able to pay for their cannabis. They were getting it from some sort of a foundation that was providing it for them in like a nonprofit situation. And that became illegal. So now we've kind of fixed that, but it's a learning curve, and the money is going to push the laws, but responsible people are going to be there to kind of keep all the important things also on the forefront. And it's also all of our jobs to support that and kind of try and stay aware and make sure that you're voting on those things and make sure that you're helping those people that are doing the things that are important.
No, it's good call. When we're talking about the different kind of experiences that you can have on weed, and like for Joe Public, that opens up. We call them tinnies over here. A tinny is like 1 gram. It's wrapped in tinfoil.
Okay.
You don't really buy those. I don't know what the equivalent is in the States, but that's kind of, if you've only got $20 and you're absolutely desperate, you'd buy a tinny. Otherwise, you'd probably buy a little bit more, like a 50s, quarters, O's, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But for Joe Public that is trying weed for the first time, or even seasoned campaigners, when they open up this bag of weed, what's something that they should be looking for that would help them say, oh yeah, this is probably good weed, or actually this smells or looks funky. This is not for me. What's some giveaways? What's some takeaways?
So rather than things that you're looking for that are good, I'm going to kind of tell you of things that you're looking for that are kind of bad.
Cool, I love that. Okay.
So Uh, when you are looking at cannabis, one of the things that is common is powder mildew, which is like
Powder
it's like
mildew.
yeah, powder mildew. It's like a mold that grows on the leaves. Okay, so you will hear people like, oh, you want the cannabis to look white and crystally, like it was rolled in sugar. And that's true. The part of the cannabis that is the good part are the oils, and they form on the outside of the flowers and leaves in these little mushroom shaped things. They're like a round head and a little stalk. And they're sometimes clear to amber color, but you can't really see those with the naked eye usually. You're just kind of looking at this cannabis and you're seeing kind of like a speckly effect. Powder mildew can sometimes be what you're seeing, and it's not crystals and stuff. So what you're looking for is, does it look more like a mold? Does it look more like a white kind of a color? You do
Okay.
not want that. You do not want like this, and it's usually kind of if you've ever had like a rose and you put it in food coloring, and then all around the outside of it, it'll get like a color from the food coloring. That's similar to how powder mildew grows too. It will be kind of on the outsides in a little bit of a pattern on the leaves and stuff like that. And powder mildew, like, listen, I have personally smoked plenty of cannabis that had powder mildew in it, and I am still here to live and tell the tale. It's not like you're going to die, but it's not good for you to smoke this stuff. So you want to do it as little as possible. And if you can kind of look at your cannabis and make sure that it doesn't have any of that, that's good.
Nice.
That's one of the first things they're also going to test for when they start legalizing and you start having um, a more commercialized buying experience. Not when you're going to your dealer on
Mm.
the corner, you could get anything. And a lot of times you're going to have powder mildew and you're going to need to kind of see that for yourself. Sometimes you can cut it off and it's not that big of a deal. You can kind of like just work around it, but you don't want that. Seeds are a thing that are not necessarily bad, but you don't want to be smoking them.
Seeds?
So if you do notice that you have seeds in your plant, you want to remove the seeds and the stems also. They're nothing in like medicinally valuable really about the stems. You can make a tea out of the stems if you save yourself a big bag of stems and you want to do something with it. You
Mm-hmm.
can do that, but it's really they're you can throw them away also. They're not very useful. And the seeds you can keep and then grow your own plants, and the seeds are extremely valuable. But a lot of people just throw the seeds away too. If you're not going to grow, they don't really have a big purpose, and you can't really make anything out of the seeds for the most part. Art wise, you could, but nothing that you're going to consume for cannabis.
Nice.
Um, and then let's see. So typically, you also want your cannabis to be fresh. So if it's like too dry, that is usually a bad thing. Also, too fresh is a bad thing. So what they say is the freshness test for cannabis is if you have a cannabis stem and you go to bend it, what you want is it to bend a little bit and then to break.
Mm-hmm.
If it breaks too easy, like ping, then
Yep.
it's too dry.
Yep.
And if it bends and it doesn't break at all, then it's probably too wet. And those are your kind of basics on what kind of cannabis you're looking for in that sense. If you're looking for concentrates, then it's going to be some other different things too. And um, some of the things you're just not going to be able to tell from visual sight, like heavy metals. You'll never be able to tell if your cannabis has heavy metals in it or not unless it's
Hmm.
analytically tested. And terpene and THC content, you're never going to be able to tell that. If you can get a microscope and look at it really close and look at the trichome heads and see if they look healthy or if they look like wispy and not healthy, but that doesn't matter that much either. So
God, there's some myth busting going on here.
yeah.
So there's the powder mildew, there is the seeds, and there is that too dry or too wet, or too
Mhm.
fresh. Sorry. Um, when I think about about the smell of it, like because people have a habit. I don't know if they do it over there, but in times of like low production, people bury it. People bury weed. which makes no sense to me. But anyway, you can like smell. I think I can smell the earthiness, but I don't actually know whether that's like people bearing weed, and so by the time it gets out into the market, it's been underground for a long time, or it's actually something that they've done in the growing process.
Correct. So yeah, let me speak to that right away.
Yes, please.
So when you grow cannabis in soil, a lot of times that flavor of the soil and smell of the soil is carried through into the plant. Oh. And so you can notice that more, especially if you're used to smoking cannabis that isn't grown in soil, and then you come across cannabis that was grown in soil, you might notice that a lot more than you would if you were just, not always experiencing hydroponic cannabis. So hydroponic cannabis can be grown in a variety of ways. Cocoa, you can even grow in an aeroponic system where just the roots are exposed and water is just kind of splashing up on the roots and there's no growing medium at all. So there's no soil involved in most hydroponic grows. So that's your main thing, is that you've got other different consistencies, and like perlite, like rock and things like that you're growing in, that is it's not the traditional soil, right? And so that makes a difference as to the way that your cannabis flavor is going to come across. A lot of people here in California grow outdoors, and they also believe that the sunlight and the air has stuff to do with how the cannabis plant represents itself too. So if you live in Humboldt, you might be really prejudiced to indoor weed at all. So even if you're growing with soil indoors, they're going to think, it's going to be inferior in some sort of ways. And vice versa. You have so much control over the climate that indoor growers can be very judgmental over outdoor grows and be like, well, you're only going to reach a certain level of THC production and you can't give it so much CO2 to really steroidify the plants. And so there's schools of thought, and there's no one right answer.
Gold.
It'll all be enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, gold. Always reminds me of that line on Friday, guys. Thought you said this was indoor, smart more like outdoor. Anyway, so I think one of the myths that I think you're starting to dispel maybe is when you look at the bud, you're holding, and you can see lots of what look like water droplets on them. Right? Is that the crystals themselves? Is it?
Yeah.
What is that?
So that the water droplets, as you put it, are they're called trichomes.
Trichome. And COM or N?
Yes, combs, no B.
Oh, cool.
Trichomes. And those are the oils in the plant. So THC, CBD, all of the chemicals, those are in those little droplets. Everything good about the cannabis plant is in the little droplet. The leaf is nothing. You don't need the leaf at all. And there's some argument that really the head, the top circular part of that trichome, really is the thing that you want. You don't even, the stalks have valuable parts in them, but if you can isolate just the trichome heads, that is the most valuable part of the trichome. And it has all of the chemical representation of the plant in it. And if I believe we also are at the point now where I think we can grow those without the plant now.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's going to be interesting to see kind of how that goes. I don't know a lot about that, but up to this point, what your goal was as a cannabis farmer was to produce a plant that was really, really a large percentage trichomes. So like, maybe 30% of your plant was that, or more if you could get that. And that, out of the weight of your plant, you would have a great value to what you grew because most of it was that. And that valuable part of the plant you can make into everything that we use cannabis for. So edibles, concentrates like hash, and then if you're just gonna not harvest, just produce it as flour, you can just sell it as flour just like that, and it's really, really great flour just like that too. So that's the ideal ultimate cannabis that people try to grow. That achieving that is extremely difficult. And so you have the large majority of cannabis is kind of not quite there, and in the middle grade area where it's very good. Some is better than others, obviously, but it isn't quite to that elite level. And so as you're doing a competition, for example, and you have a lot of experience with cannabis, you start to recognize the certain varieties that growers produce that are elite amongst all of the rest.
Wow.
And when you can notice those things as somebody who has enough experience in cannabis to be able to do that, then you can be a judge and you can really say, oh, okay, this is better than that. And some of it is going to be preference based. You're going to have things that you like and you're going to lean towards those things. But you're going to also be able to notice all the bad things that I've mentioned before. So any red flag is going to kind of stand out to you. And then you're going to be able to kind of really see, oh, wow, these things, this person is able to achieve this. And you're looking at it from your own personal preference. And then you're going to be provided with the analytical results. So then you can see kind of what the science says about it. And you can really make a judgment on these things that's similar to wine or similar to any other kind of thing, food tasting and all of that kind of stuff. You're smelling it. If there's powdered mildew, that's the smell that's bad. When you smell cannabis, you're like, oh, that's an off-putting smell. That's powdered mildew, almost always. It could be some sort of growing chemical that is being used that's off-putting, but I would say 99% of the time, if you're getting a bad smell, it's powdered mildew.
Okay.
And then we also have fungus gnats. So there's like spider mites. So there are little pests that can also grow on your plant, and that can be present in the plant too. So if you see like little spider webs or little like bugs, you don't want that in your plant either. That's a little more obvious to people, but those are the bad things that can happen with cannabis that you're looking for. And yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I have beside me some medical marijuana.
Okay.
I had it prescribed to me. So nobody panic, any of my audience that are watching, or not that I'd smoke weed if it wasn't medicinal marijuana, to be fair. But this particular bit that I'm holding in my hand was prescribed by the GP, the general practitioner, the doctor. And I don't know how well you can see it. Let me just come back a little bit. Is that coming through clear to you there?
That's pretty clear. Yeah, I can see it.
Cool. So
I think I have a pretty good idea what that is.
Nice. So that has been like they do a percentage of THC on the packet. This is, and I believe this was 15%.
Okay, that's pretty fair.
Yeah. So when I look at this, and to be fair, if I put this up, if I went out and bought marijuana, just like off the street kind of weed, it would look pretty much the same as I think what I'm holding in my hands now. To be fair, this looks a bit more compact, but I don't know whether that's just in the packaging process.
It's a growing thing.
Right. So if I was to like break this open a bit and to look at it, so, I can't, with the naked eye, I'm a bit blind as well, to be fair, but with the naked eye, I can see, the evidence of those trichomes. I'm going to use that phrase a bit more. I think on the outside, they look like the water droplets. It's got its own, this is called shishka berry, and I don't actually know if I'm perfect.
Okay.
I don't actually know
that's an old strain.
Is it? Cool.
Yeah.
And so is that, if I looked into my my files, I could probably tell you a whole lot more about it. But in terms of what I'm holding, what you're saying, and your knowledge, what kind of experience would I expect to have off this?
Okay. So without smelling it and smoking it and like being able to touch it for texture and etc., there's going to be a lot of things I'm not able to judge.
All good.
But from just looking at it the way that you showed me and thinking about other cannabis that I've experienced that looks like that, I would say you're going to get like a B plus probably experience with that. I think that plant could probably be represented in a better way, but also it depends like how it was grown. You're holding up some pretty small buds. It could have been that they just didn't grow very big plants, and so that's why those buds are kind of small like that. And it's not that the plant wasn't grown to its full potential.
Okay.
That they just kind of grew. It's called Sea of Green, if you've ever heard of that.
Sea of Green.
And that's when you grow lots of little plants rather than like one big plant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, so looking at it from that standpoint, I would say that that's kind of what it looks like. It was green. I did notice a couple little brown little specks, I think, on it, or like kind of, like what looked like burned leaves, essentially, to me as a grower. So if those are hairs, if those are just little red hairs.
Yes, I think they are little red hairs.
Yeah, I might be just mistaking the little red hairs for little burned leaves. But one thing that you can do with cannabis, if you feed it too many nutrients, the leaves will start to turn a little brown. And so that can sometimes happen. But yeah, that looks like a very nice cannabis plant. And like if it is extremely aromatic, then that would be something that could be competitive in a competition, you know. You're also going to really want to be able to, if you could see the trichomes with your naked eye, where you can see the stalk and see the head of it, then that's a really good sign too.
No, I don't reckon I can like see. I reckon it just looks like it's.
They're just like little crystal-y looking things, right?
Yeah, but I could. There's no way I could see the crystals. It's just like there's a look that it has over it where I can tell that there's something on the plant matter, material itself. Yeah.
Well, the best thing that you're probably getting out of that is that they're growing it with the right kind of chemicals. So they're not feeding it things that are going to be harmful to your health. And that usually is the difference between medical marijuana and non-medical marijuana, is that there's no heavy metals, there's no pesticides used, they're looking out for the powder mildew, they're looking out for spider mites and fungus gnats and any other kind of pests that could be present. And that they're basically eliminating all the harmful things that could be bad for you. And that a lot of times makes for a more healthy plant to consume. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it's actually better than the street pot. The street pot looks maybe even better than the medical pot. And in some ways that could be true. You know, maybe your THC percentages are higher. You know, maybe there's certain things that they're able to do by using these other chemicals, similar to bodybuilding, you know. And you might get a more kind of beefed up plant from the street in many ways, but does it not have any heavy metals? Does it not have any of these other bad things that you don't want it to have? Was it grown with these harmful chemicals that you can't even test for? You know, that you have no idea what is in the plant now. Some of them you can, and they've been made illegal to grow with in the United States, but some of them you can't. And so that's the big advantage that you're hoping to get from a medical plant versus a street plant, is that you're eliminating all those potential hazards.
Yeah, so much cleaner by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a few years ago, I was backpacking and I went through Uruguay in South America, and I went on essentially a weed tour. And so because it's decriminalized there, and they kind of took me through the shop and then the production area and whatnot. And Then I sampled several different, I'll just say types. I won't say strains because I'm not entirely sure if it was different strains, but several different types of weed.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a different experience for each one. And they were quite noticeable differences. It wasn't like I was happy and laughing, and then I was happy and laughing and relaxed. It was like I had the giggles, and I had non-stop giggles, and then I had some orange juice, I think it was, and just like had a bit of a breather. We just kind of sat, chat for a while, and then I had another one, and then I was just so relaxed. I was almost, I wasn't super stoned or anything. I was just really chilled. And then another one I had, I was really talkative. And just having that experience gave me a better awareness of the different types and the impact that they can have on you, or the influence that they can have on you. What's going on there? What's actually happening?
Yeah, you asked the right person. So cannabis has about 400 different chemicals that can be present in a plant. But in any one plant, there's usually only representative, maybe like 180 or something of the chemicals that are possible.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're getting these plants, they're different combinations of all those chemicals. And so as you're experiencing the one that makes you happy, it's maybe has more of those chemicals out of that 400 that lean towards happiness. And we don't have a super fundamental science as to what causes what right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're learning that terpenes. Terpenes are traditionally things that give you smells and sometimes flavors of certain things. So like limonene is present in lemons. And when you have this like lemony, really kind of citrusy smell, a lot of that is limonene. And there's myrcene, and that's a different kind of terpene. And when you smell them, they have very distinct, different profiles that you would never mistake limonene for myrcene.
Okay.
Very, very distinctly different. And there's thinking that these things are also playing a part in how the cannabis affects you as far as your high. So you're going to have your THC percentages and CBD and CBG and CBN and all the other things that are in cannabis, and all the cannabinoids, which is the name of them all. And then you're also going to have terpene that is a part of your cannabis profile. And then in addition to that, you're going to have, I think soon we're going to be able to identify flavonoids and other things that are kind of like playing a role in this whole profile of what chemicals make up a cannabis plant. And as you are more exposed to cannabis, these subtle nuances become less and less identifiable. So for me, most cannabis is exactly the same. I smoked so much, so long for so many years, and it's very hard for me to say, oh, this has like a really happy or really, those subtle differences are much more noticeable to a novice, to somebody that is a more casual user. And you might really see those things brought out into your personality when you're experiencing them that way.
That's so cool. That's so cool. My mates are going to love that I'm a novice. They're really going to feast on that. That's brilliant. When people hear chemicals, they're going to have a natural aversion, right? Because there's this, people very much wanting to have less chemicals in their diet and intake and whatnot. Are there good chemicals and bad chemicals in this? Or is it actually, this is all poison and this is the effect it's having on you?
Well, so contrary to popular belief, cannabis is not good for you to breathe in to your lungs. You're breathing in smoke. This is not necessarily carcinogenic like cigarettes, but it's bad for your lungs. If you're an athlete that runs and things like that, you're going to notice performance issues when you're smoking cannabis and things like that. And you can also work around it. It's forgiving in that sense that many athletes use cannabis and they're still able to be top level athletes. But a lot of times they're maybe not using cannabis right before they go and do some sort of like really cardiovascular dependent sport. They're going to be using it in a different way.
Yeah.
And the chemicals are not bad. There is no chemical in cannabis that is like theoretically harmful to you. There are things that can be harmful that are used to grow cannabis. And as those things are represented in the plant, those things can be harmful to you. So, for example, there's an oil called, I think it's called neem oil. And for a while, there was and I'm sure this is still going around to a certain degree, there's a syndrome going around called cannabis hypermesis syndrome. And they thought that this was basically like an overdose on cannabis for people that were using cannabis in massive amounts, that they were getting sick from it and then no longer able to recover unless they just quit cannabis entirely. And what that seems to be is actually a reaction to this growing ingredient called neem oil, that plants that have that represented in them, people that are exposed to that over a long period of time can then start having this kind of cannabis hypermesis syndrome reaction, which is like vomiting and like the opposite of what you would associate cannabis with. Yeah. And so there is that. There's truth to the schizophrenia stuff, that sometimes cannabis and other psychedelic drugs can trigger a schizophrenic episode in people who are kind of on the border of that. And it's not necessarily causing more schizophrenia in the world, but as a person that is susceptible to that sort of thing, it can cause you to have an episode. And that having an episode could, in very rare cases, be a more serious thing down the line. So all of that stuff is real.
Yeah. And I think it's really, it's sound thinking, it's safe thinking to acknowledge that as well. I think, recognizing that if you're susceptible to these episodes of, mental health, like cataclysmic mental health issues, then smoking weed's probably not a good thing. But
it can be a bad thing, but it can also be a healing thing. I have 2 documentaries out right now, that the first documentaries I was able to make, they were both about cannabis as medicine. One's called Cannabis versus Cancer, and the other one is called About Cannabis and Cancer. And Cannabis versus Cancer has some really profound cannabis cancer stories about like basically death sentences that were turned around and people healed from them. But About Cannabis and Cancer has some stories about people with dementia that use cannabis.
Wow.
And it makes their thoughts more clear. And so there's some things that you would think, kind of from experiencing cannabis and just knowing how the effects are, that typically your memory gets worse. Typically it affects you in this kind of opposite way that you would think would be helpful to somebody that has dementia. But when you're dealing with that situation, it has the opposite effect. It actually makes their thoughts more clear, and they're able to perform in a more precise way than they were when they're suffering from their dementia episodes and stuff. So it's really fascinating. Cannabis is kind of the universal drug. That's one of the reasons I also said it should be the first starting point. I have a friend called Dr. Uma, and she says cannabis is the exit drug for all other drugs. And, we really shouldn't start it that way. We should start with cannabis and then try the other things. It shouldn't be the last thing that you try before you die. It shouldn't be this like miracle bullet that, we've tried everything else. Hopefully, let's try this now. No. It needs to be the opposite way.
Yeah, I totally clicked follow and subscribe to that. I am absolutely on board. It's you go to the doctors, and the amount of times I've been prescribed amitriptyline for anything. I'm like, what is this drug even meant to do? I mean, I've lost track. But between that and I don't know the opioid situation that's unfolding, I'm like, yes, yeah, I'm not entirely convinced we've got our ducks lined up. You mentioned about athletes and inhaling and smoking marijuana and the differences. So, you know, going from smoking a joint or having a bong and a cone and whatnot, and now there's been uh, a greater awareness of vaping. Not just vaping nicotine, but vaping THC, vaping
Yeah.
marijuana. I noticed a comment that you put down about like some of the challenges that are coming with that. What does that look like?
So when we are dealing with vape products, the flavoring that they are using to flavor these products is terpene, like we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And terpenes are very, very wonderful chemicals when they're in very, very tiny, tiny doses. And you mentioned something like this earlier. If you look at the warning label of a terpene product when it is in its pure form, a 99% pure terpene is a liquid, and generally it has a warning label that is fatal if inhaled or something extremely serious. Terpene is mostly used for consumption, eating, or sometimes terpene is used in cleaning products for cleaning your house.
Hmm.
It's an extremely potent chemical, and breathing it in is new for all of us. And so they have these extremely scary warnings on breathing it in. And as we're having more and more of these products that are made to be breathing in terpene in combination with whatever else is in that product, be it a nicotine product, be it just a propylene glycol product, there's no nicotine, there's no THC, it's just a vape with flavor. Then there's also these THC vapes where we have those. And where I live, you have other drugs that are being put in these vape cartridges too. I've seen DMT vapes. And
Wow.
yeah, so all of this stuff kind of goes towards this idea that it's not really the core chemical that is bad to be vaped, and the vaping tools are these cheap Chinese products. They're made for the absolute lowest expense that they can make them. So there is some of that with these cheap products having like kind of bad aspects to them. But that's not really what's unhealthy about it. It is the terpene, and it is people making these products and selling them on the black market and just being irresponsible with what they're putting in the product.
Mm.
And random people are going to be using these things in massive amounts. And when you're sucking down one or two of those things a day, you could really be doing some damage to yourself. Now, I will also say, like, if you're a cigarette smoker and you're switching to these vapes, a lot of times it is a more healthy alternative.
Mm.
So there is a weird balance where it can be helpful to certain people. And if you're using it in a very, very economical way, or you puff on that thing rarely, the harm that you're going to be causing yourself is probably pretty small. I don't think it would be that people what to do, and then you need to be responsible with the way that you're using it and not abusing it.
Oh, I just lost you for a second there, Jeremy. You still there, mate?
Did I lose you?
Yeah, we're back on. I don't know what happened there, but we'll continue.
Yep, I'm still here.
Roll on. Awesome. Let's just put it down
Yeah,
to
yeah, no
maybe
worries.
some government department's probably listening in.
Yeah, yeah, they don't like my killing the vape pens.
There's a market that you're slowly crushing here. And so vaping. So I moved, well, one of my goals is to swim a significant stretch of water that's near the city that I live. It's called the Cook Straits, 26 kilometers at its closest point. Um, I can run forever. I can do loads of jiu-jitsu. But I had noticed that when I was using marijuana, it was through a joint, um, or dots, nice, whatever. But I switched into a vape, and I actually purchased a vape from Hawaii years ago. I can't remember how long ago it was, but it was designed for herb. It was designed for flower.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a PAX 2. I've got it somewhere. I knew I had it somewhere. Actually, it's because it's sitting right beside me. I mean, I haven't used this.
You put actual flour in that.
Yeah, that's right. And so one of the reasons why I made that switch was because I found, not being a smoker, so I didn't smoke nicotine. I mean, I might have tried and pretended I was smoking when I was 13 or 14, but other than that, I never really smoked tobacco at all. And so, I always felt like when I was inhaling that smoke from smoking marijuana in a kind of combustion type joint or whatever, it felt horrible in my lungs. Kind of picking up on your comment earlier about like you're not meant to inhale the smoke, right? Like whether it's nicotine or manuka chips or weed or whatever. Like our body's just not really designed for that. And so I thought, well, what is something that is going to allow me to get the kind of hit that I'm looking for, the kind of high that I'm looking for from this medicinal marijuana versus smoking a joint. And I purchased this thing here, which I'm not sure if you know. This thing is like a not
volcano.
Well, that's right. It's by the same makers of the volcano. And so the engineering behind this thing is just something else, to be fair. Really, really surprised at the quality of the engineering behind it. But kind of bring it back to my earlier point was, it feels like it's the lesser of two evils, so to speak, where I want to continue getting the high that I'm getting, but I don't want the thing of just like pouring all that smoke into my lungs.
So I have more to add. I kind of skipped a big part.
Oh, cool.
Now that I'm thinking about it. So I moved right on to the vape pens, but if you look at my history, I was one of the people who brought consuming hash into popularity through our events called the Secret Cup and through winning competitions at High Times and stuff like that. And so I also did like you when I was smoking flower. I noticed it's kind of happening, and then I switched to a volcano, like the traditional big volcano with the bags, and I started vaporizing flower. And there's a huge benefit to eliminating the plant matter. What you want, like I said before, is that stalk, that mushroom cap trichome. That's all you want. So there's a variety of ways to kind of do that. One way is vaporizing, and then another way is by smoking concentrate. So hash and traditional dabs now is what people call it. All of that is those trichome heads concentrated down and the plant matter eliminated and gotten rid of. And so there's a variety of ways that you can smoke hash. And so you can smoke hash out of a hash pipe. You can smoke hash in a joint with flour or with some other things to give it like a big punch, so you're consuming a lot less. Maybe before, when you would smoke, you would need to smoke 2 or 3 bowls in a pipe. But if you put one little thing of hash, maybe you only need 1 bowl in a pipe. And so you're consuming far less of the plant matter. Less and less plant matter that you can consume, the better it is. And then ultimately, if you get to my level, or I love to point out in the movie American Beauty, the guy that is selling the pot to Kevin Spacey, he only smokes hash in the movie. And so I also only smoke hash. And I was one of the people that kind of popularized dabbing. And so the kind of hash that we smoke turns into a liquid. And when we started to discover that, there became all these tools that we needed to incorporate into it, and the tools needed to be made. And then friends of mine were making these tools. And the absolute best way to consume cannabis, in my opinion, is to smoke hash and to dab concentrate. Because as opposed to those vape pens with all the other added chemicals and stuff like that, for the large majority, if you're getting hash that you can dab, and especially if you're making it yourself, that's a whole other thing. But you know that none of those chemicals, that none of the extra terpene is added into it. There's not all these other things, and you're eliminating so much of the plant matter that all of those other little side effects go away. So I would get fatigued at the end of the day from smoking flower. Sometimes I'd maybe get a foggy feeling or like a headache from that, and just like a very like a dirty kind of it would be this negative kind of recuperation period after I'd smoked and had this like fun period. When I do dabs, there's no recuperation period. You never feel run down or like down. All those bad things come from consuming the carbon from the plant. So the more you can eliminate that by vaporizing, like what you have with the tool that you have, or any of the other vaporizing tools like that, and just vaporizing the flower just straight like that and trying to consume the oil just like that. That's actually also a really great way. There's no added terpene with flower, and it's a very, very good way of doing that. Or you have a nice way of getting hash and you smoke hash and maybe you dab it with a dab rig, or you have some sort of good way of consuming hash. And I think those are the two best ways of consuming cannabis, other than eating it.
Yes.
The absolute most healthy way.
Yes, which brings me on to my next point, is about edibles. Mm-hmm. So we have the butter. We get the butter, cannabis butter, canna butter. Mm-hmm. And my wife makes delicious biscuits, like really tasty as well. It doesn't feel like I'm eating a plant. And they're the right level of potency, I guess is the right phrase to use. Different highs, though, I've noticed. Quite different highs.
Yeah. So when you're eating cannabis, it is processed with your liver, and it becomes a different chemical, which is called 11-hydroxy metabolite. And so it is an entirely different experience than smoking cannabis. And it can be like more narcotic, like hallucinogenic even.
Why do we get that... people always talk about when you have edibles, you get that body stoned feel.
Well, I believe that it is that transformation into that other chemical that you don't get that chemical from smoking. So you could smoke every single day. And then when you eat cannabis, you have not experienced that chemical any of those days that you smoked. So you don't have a tolerance to that at all. So it's going to be a wild ride. And usually a much more potent experience.
This is explaining a lot. Explaining a lot. You're talking about because there's also, at the moment we're seeing a lot more come through. So even my GP was talking about whether I wanted to. The pros and cons of using things like the flower or droppers as well. So I guess another form of edible, but it comes in like these vials, little test tube droppers.
So they're alcohol tinctures that you put under your tongue, and it's made to kind of be your mouth is the most absorbent. Well, it's the second most absorbent gland in your body, and so if you can kind of get the chemical in there and get it to absorb in through your mouth, it could be a really effective way for certain people to get that cannabis feeling without having to smoke anything.
Yeah, or eat anything. My cousin being a classic example, his mouth was just so full of ulcers, he just couldn't physically eat.
And eating, you're going to process it through your stomach. Like I said, again, if you're processing it through your mouth here, it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to go quicker. You don't have to wait the long time that it's going to take if you're eating it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. We talked about athletes and MMA, and I've got a more than a mild fascination with UFC. Um, it's becoming a bit of a problem, I think. But we're seeing a lot of these athletes, but we're also seeing like the enforcement and the structure that was prohibitive with marijuana use starting to change as well. Like USADA is starting to take a bit more of a that's a US triggered what is it? Anti-drug agency. I can't remember what it is. They're basically the testing regime for all athletes. And so you're starting to see like the shift there in sports as well. What about people who have quite legitimate concerns about people being stoned and operating machinery or stoned and on the road? This is going to slowly come to the fore, right? And I noticed a lot of this was as part of this misinformation that was going out there. What do you see your experience in the States looking like, and what do you think that's likely to look like over here in New Zealand?
Well, for the most part, people, when they smoke, they become a little bit more cautious. So usually in the effect of them operating things that are like heavy machinery, like driving and things like that, you don't see as large of an increase in danger as you do with other drugs like alcohol or prescription drugs, that kind of thing. However, it's still not good. A lot of people that consume cannabis and then have situations where they're operating heavy machinery, they do have accidents. And so it does impair your ability to do those sort of things, but not drastically, just a slight impairment. So you're going to have probably eventually some sort of testing that they can do to where they're going to be able to accurately tell if you are impaired or not. We don't really have that right now, the testing for cannabis impairment, like similar to a DUI.
Mm-hmm.
It's very primitive. We do not have great stuff, and you can get out of a lot of those situations because of how inaccurate the testing is. Mm-hmm. But they are still doing it. And I have friends that have been pulled over and given tickets for driving under the influence of marijuana. And that's going to be a part of society in the future where you will be able to be charged with those sort of things. And when you are, renting a car, you're probably going to have to sign something saying that you're not going to operate it when you're using cannabis. There's going to be a variety of things that get kind of lumped into that same thing, just like the way that you're not supposed to operate things on normal medicines from your doctor. That is the way that you should be doing cannabis as well.
So, yeah, it's quite I think it feels quite clumsy in the approach that we're taking at the moment. With the cannabis use, it's very much a binary thing. Yes, you've used it. No, you haven't used it, and no distinction between like whether you are even impaired, and to what level of impairment you've had, or what level of impairment it's affected you.
Yep.
That phrase. Whereas for drinking, we've got, I think the level is 0.05 or something, whatever it is now. But there's like a line, right? And then when you, if it ends up going to court, you can always see like this person was 2 times over the limit or 3 times over the limit. And so people have a bit of an understanding there. But in the absence of all that framework, it is very much just like this big club. Yeah, you've had it. You must have had so much that you were like deeply impaired and you made all these mistakes, but it doesn't take into consideration at all the level that's within your system. So there's a bit to go, I think. I think we're still very much in our infancy in that space.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they're very, very much figuring it out here. And they just want the money. They don't really care about the social problem. They see it as an advantage because the amount of problems that they're having to deal with are small versus the amount of money that they're able to get from allowing people to buy cannabis and these shops, So slowly but surely they will figure it out. And if anybody famous ever has some sort of an accident and brings a lot of like attention to cannabis impairing your senses, driving or doing anything, then we'll probably see a big shift in the momentum of trying to make progress there. But at the moment, it's really, really slow. And it's kind of up to the individual to just not get caught and not have to participate in this process of proving yourself innocent, because they like you said, they have a wide margin of being able to consider you under the influence. And so if you smoked many hours ago and you just tell them that is grounds for them to, act on you. And it's going to get better as time progresses, but right now it's kind of the ball is in their court, and you don't want to give them any sort of ammunition to be able to charge you with any sort of marijuana crime being under the influence, because it can be really bad, or it could be almost nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, fair call. Well, Jeremy, I feel like we've covered a lot of bases there, bro. A lot of really valuable ones, and ones I'm definitely going to take away. What's next on the horizon for you, mate?
Well, I just released a book called Jack Moves, a memoir of the weed trade and dangerous living, that tells all the stories of I've been home invaded twice. I've been robbed numerous times. I almost was arrested doing my international cannabis competitions all over the United States and in Spain. And I was arrested in Arizona. And all of these stories are told in the book. And there's some other funny stories that kind of happen along the way too. And it also kind of tells the history of cannabis during those years and my personal history of my journey in that world, where there was basically no cannabis businesses, and then slowly there were medical cannabis businesses, and now there's recreational cannabis, and it's moving into the mainstream where pretty soon we'll have federal legalization. And that is my latest project. I also have a few films that are getting released that are in the strange phenomenon category.
Cool.
My film The Secret Cup came out not all that long ago, and if you go to my website, theskyisland.com, you can get links to all of my movies there. And if you just type my name into wherever it is that you stream movies, you can get a lot of my movies that way too.
Awesome.
So, and they're all free for the most part. So if you like them, go on the IMDb website and rate my movies. That's the thing that you can do to help me. It costs nothing. It's free to rate my movies and leave me reviews. And that is super helpful to me and all filmmakers. So that's probably the best thing. And I have an event that I'm about to do in Los Angeles. So a company from Europe contacted me, and they know about my history in the cannabis world, and they wanted me to be the headliner of their event coming up. It's called the American Autoflower Cup, and we're doing that at the end of January. It's going to be this like really exclusive, private industry leader event, and they've given me a lot of ability to do things with it. So we'll see what the future holds. Maybe we can do some really cool stuff.
I love it, man. That's awesome. Thank you so much, bro, for taking the time to join me. Really enjoyed this conversation. I can guarantee I'm going to walk away and have like 10 more questions loaded up. But just to revoice what you've said, anybody out there, was it theskyisland.com?
That's right.
Cool. Go to theskyisland.com. Or anywhere you stream your movies, go and look for Jeremy Norrie. I'll put some notes into the show notes as well, so I might grab those off you as well, bro. If anybody wants to reach out and catch up with Jeremy, if any or all of this conversation you found entertaining, informative, or just like some deep insights there, totally encourage you to reach out to him like I have, and so glad that I did. For everything else is MasterCard right now. Please do take the time also to click follow, like, subscribe, whatever it is. Do all the things on this podcast that you're going to do on the IMDb site as well, so we can get the word out there. Jeremy, thank you so much for your time, bro. I do really appreciate that, man. That was just great. Brilliant.
Well, my pleasure. I have a fascination with New Zealand and Australia, and I've never been to that part of the world. And I've found it like super exciting to be able to do a podcast to talk to people out there. And hopefully someday I get to come out there myself.
No doubt, man. I know exactly where you could be staying as well. Happy to host you, bro.
Cool.
All right. Bye for now.
Thank you.